We're going live.
Great, thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's Thursday, February 25th. It's 9:01 a.m. and this is a meeting at Senate Natural Resources and Energy. We're continuing our work on weatherization, and we're checking in with some folks on the front lines. We've been looking at innovative ways to fund this work, including on the bill payment mechanisms and to the meter payment mechanisms, such as Paul Sillo and EESI talked to us about. And so as part of learning more about how this may or may not be a good fit for Vermont moving forward, we thought it'd be helpful to talk to continue our conversation with the utilities that would be front and center on using methods like this to do that work. And so with that, I'd like to welcome again Patty Richards and Melissa Bailey, and you can go in sequence if you like, or or you can do tag team back and forth. So the floor is yours, Ms. Richards and Ms. Bailey.
Excellent. How do you want to do this, Melissa? Do you want to go back and forth?
I'm fine with that. Do you want to start? I think we have pretty different approaches on weatherization. So does WEC want to kind of cover, and then we can make it more iterative?
Yeah, so what I'll do is, why don't I just tee up a little bit, and this won't take long. I don't have any material to share. I'm just going to talk from the hip. And maybe Melissa, you go, and we could have some conversation from the two of us, and then open it up for questions. Does that work, Senator Bray?
Sure. Excellent. Thanks.
Okay. WEC has been a long champion, or let me back up. I'm Patty Richards, the general manager at Washington Electric Co-op. We're a small cooperative utility in the state. We roughly 1% of the state's energy load, but we serve 41 towns and roughly 17% of the land mass. So while we are a very small energy footprint, we're a large geographic footprint for the state of Vermont. Washington Electric Co-op, and I'll refer to as WEC, this is for the YouTube listeners. WEC has been a long champion of weatherization efforts and conservation for 20 plus years, going far, far back into time. And in today's space, our renewable energy standard, it's called Tier 3 efforts, which are beneficial electrification efforts. We tie weatherization into our programs. In addition to giving incentives for things like lawn mowing equipment, leaf blowers, cold climate heat pumps, electric vehicles, we also give incentives for weatherization, and we're working with Capstone to carry out weatherization work as part of our Tier 3 program offerings. So we weaved weatherization directly into our beneficial electrification programs that are part of the renewable energy standard. We also, for incentive dollars that go out for cold climate heat pumps, we require the entity, the home, to either submit to us or give us information relative to the building infrastructure if it's a weatherized house. If it's a fairly new home and they've got some sort of energy test that they've done recently, that satisfies. But we don't give an incentive over and above the Efficiency Vermont incentive unless they can show that it's a tight house, that it's a fairly weatherized house. That doesn't mean that it has to be a crazy tight house, but we want to make sure we're sending a signal that yes, we're going to give you funds for cold climate heat pumps and other electric uses that heat your home. But it's also important to weatherize your house. And if you have a leaky house, maybe rather than spend the money on heating technology, it might be better to spend that money on tightening up the house. So we have weaved in weatherization into our Tier 3 program structure. In terms of on-bill tariffs and things relative to funding on the bill, we do not have that specific mechanism set up today. I'm not sure if our billing system would be able to handle that. It would likely be a manual process, and that concerns me. We already have some complexities with manual processes on our bill now relative to net metering that it's really been a staff drain, and we're probably going to end up hiring staff to be able to do billing for net metering. So adding an on-bill mechanism, it would create complexity and difficulty and extra expense for WEC. I'm not saying that that's a no, that we wouldn't do it, but I'm conscious of the fact that in order to do these programs, you got to hire staff to do it.
Right.
So while it sounds like a really great idea to do an on-bill program, there's many complexities that come with that in terms of how we administer it. And then in the event we have somebody that doesn't pay their bill, we get into the complexity of how we deal with, potentially a large sum of money that can't be paid off.
Right.
WEC is a not-for-profit, and anything that doesn't get paid in terms of whether it's a bill in arrears or whether it would be something like this, an on-bill finance where they owe us some funds, would get passed on to other members.
Sure.
WEC
Can
is
I
concerned
jump
about
in?
rates. Of course.
Sorry to interrupt. Can I jump in just for a second? So the testimony we're going to have later this morning from Utility, my understanding is they are, so we need to learn more, but basically you can outsource, or they can provide this kind of service to a utility, so this is, well, we'll learn more, but it's, so if a utility says, oh, that sounds like an interesting program, but it could be an administrative nightmare for us, I think there is an opportunity to outsource the servicing of that. So of course it has to be cost effective and work and all the rest, but thanks for raising, we don't want to keep on making programs that don't make sense because the administrative burden is so high that they're just not tenable.
So that's great to know there's a service that does that. My first question is, how much do they cost?
Yeah, right.
What is
of course.
the fee for service? If it's, if they could do it very inexpensively, that's fantastic.
Yes.
Certainly, if they would take on that non-payment risk, that's even better. If they could absorb that financial risk, that would be fantastic. But the first question I have is, what does it cost?
Right. Yeah. And just a little more in response. So the working group that the bill establishes, this is one of the things for them to really bear down on and learn more about. And for instance, on the to the meter version of things, whose capital is actually funding the measures that are going to be taken? Is it utility capital, or is it capital from outside the utility, and it's really channeled through the utility? So there's some pretty big choices here and a lot more to learn. But it's interesting to learn about an innovative program that's working for some utilities and see if there's a fit here. So sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted to build some context around this morning's conversation. Thanks.
Absolutely. And this is great to have it as a conversation and not me just as a talking head. In terms of talking points, that's pretty much the points that I'll cover, and happy to take any questions or turn it over to Melissa.
I do have one quick question. I had talked to one of your customers who said they participated in a program. I don't quite really understand what they were telling me, but along the lines of you made him an offer too good to refuse. Like it was, you were going to in some way help with weatherization work, and the economies gained by doing the work were going to be greater than the cost of participating. So does that sound familiar to you in some way? It reminds me a little of sort of the on the meter, or to the meter, or on the bill construct. That's why I'm asking.
It sounds as if they participated in a weatherization. I mean, not knowing the details, it's hard to jump in.
I think it was a cold climate hot water heater.
Yeah, so we offer, in addition to the Efficiency Vermont incentives, we offer incentives over and above what Efficiency Vermont offers. So this customer made a decision that they wanted this technology. We helped them out financially, and obviously their perception is it's too good of a deal not to pass up, which I'm happy to hear.
Right. Okay, great. Well, thanks. Any other committee questions for Ms. Richards? Right. Great. Well, Ms. Bailey, Good morning again.
Hi there. Good morning. Again, Melissa Bailey, Manager of Government and Member Relations for Vermont Public Power Supply Authority. And just for folks who VEPSA is new to, we're a joint action agency serving 11 municipal electric utilities in Vermont. In aggregate, the member utilities serve about 30,000 customers and is comparable in size to Burlington Electric, where 5% of Vermont's electric load are VEPSA member utilities customers. And similar to WEC, we operate on a not-for-profit basis and deliver electric services at cost to the end users. One of VEPSA's key roles in relation to our members is delivering the Tier 3 programs under the Renewable Energy Standard that Ms. Richards referenced. So the topic of on-bill financing and weatherization and how those do or don't fit within Tier 3 is of interest to VEPSA. You know, it's something we've been kind of focused on over the past several years since Tier 3 took effect. VEPSA's overall Tier 3 strategy has been to focus on electrification measures. So again, measures that add electric load and add electric retail sales for the utility. The rationale for that being our primary focus is, of course, that that essentially ensures equity in Tier 3 by ensuring that all ratepayers benefit from the projects that we support. So in terms of weatherization, VEPSA sees the role of distribution utilities as being a supportive role of weatherization efforts. We don't see ourselves as the primary deliverers of weatherization. We think there are entities in the state that are better suited to provide those services and to fund them. So through our Tier 3 programs, we take a similar, not the same approach as WEC. Cold climate heat pumps, of course, would be one of the measures, the type of projects that we offer financial incentives for under Tier 3. We also add a financial incremental rebate amount for homes that are weatherized. So essentially, that's the sort of supporting role we see. If you put in a heat pump in a weatherized home, you're going to get a higher rebate in acknowledgement of the energy work that's been done there. But we don't offer standalone incentives, financial incentives for weatherization projects on their own. We do think that, on the bill financing, we completely understand why the electric utility bill is an attractive mechanism, right, for repayment of, potential loans that may be given for weatherization projects. And really appreciate the committee's interest in this topic. I think you're asking all of the right questions. VEPSA would view the risk to the utility similarly to WEC's view that Patty articulated. Our member utilities essentially don't want to be lenders, don't want to be in the position of holding debt and loaning money. We think there are other entities in the state that fit that niche better than we do and are better equipped. In terms of acting as a pass-through for loan money, that's one option. A third party would loan the money, and the collection mechanism again would be the electric bill. I always have to add the same disclaimer that Patty did about administrative costs. We are always looking to avoid unnecessary administrative costs that are borne by all ratepayers. So we would be looking for any kind of financing regime to ensure, protections for the utility, which when we say the utility, we mean our ratepayers collectively, and, ensuring, again, safeguards against non-payment. If a customer doesn't pay, who's left holding the bag, who's on the hook for that money. I think we have been looking at kind of a couple different avenues. We have looked at the PAYS model, the pay as you save model. I think it's a really attractive model that holds a lot of value for some customers under the PAYS model. I think the committee's familiar. Essentially, the customer is guaranteed that the energy savings from the upgrades will generate more savings than the financial cost of the upgrade. Essentially, it's called bill neutrality, and they'll never pay more on their electric bill after undertaking the upgrades than they were previously. So certainly attractive from a customer perspective. We're open to the concept. We're exploring it. We've had some conversations with vendors around this concept. It does put the utility essentially on the hook for the repayment. The utility essentially funds the upgrades up front. So that is it's an obstacle. It's not one that we have ruled out at this point.
Sure.
So, go ahead.
No, go ahead and finish. I didn't want to interrupt. I did have a follow-on, but.
Sure. I was going to say a corollary concern. I mean, again, I think the committee is aware, right, of all the conversations that's been going on over the past few weeks. There are always trade-offs in any policy position. I think on the pays model, essentially what we've been learning is there will be some upgrades may not fit that box of being able to generate enough savings to cover the cost. So there is this one potential concern is, lost opportunities, foregone opportunities, where if you go into the home, you can pick a handful of measures that are cost effective from a dollars and cents perspective for the customer. In essence, they will generate enough savings to pay for themselves. And that's fantastic. And I think that this is a really great model for getting those measures installed and getting those savings. There are other measures that might screen from a societal perspective based on their environmental benefits. Those may not get implemented under the pay structure because the actual dollars and cents won't be delivered if that delineation makes sense.
Sure. Can you say a little more about, like when you say screen, like how you're using that and what might be an example of something that would have societal value, but not necessarily enough savings to be a net positive cash flow or neutral for the homeowner?
Yeah. And I think some of that may have come out of testimony that you all have heard, but around certain weatherization and certain, there's maybe a diminishing return to the quality of, say, air sealing and insulation work. So some of that work, just straight up insulation, may not deliver enough savings to justify the upfront cost.
Okay.
Specifically around weatherization measures, there are some that may not meet that hurdle, whereas I think heat pumps generally would. Electrification measures, there would be enough financial savings to justify the payment. So again, it's not, I don't highlight that as an insurmountable risk. I think another point I really want to make clearly is that financing is not going to replace funding. Financing is not going to replace incentives. And so to the extent there is that delta between what will be paid back in energy savings and the cost of the project, that can of course be made up with incentive dollars, putting a lump sum of money on the table to buy down the cost.
Sure. And so one thing that's possible, leaving aside whose money, utility versus a third party's money, is used to implement the measures, and the utility plays that role of being the point of connection to collecting the money and maybe helping facilitate the relationship to get vendors there or something like that to do the work. Have you thought about how this might, because the savings, you could return only a portion of the savings and still, in some cases, be net cash positive for the homeowner. So there could be, you might not only just cover your costs of administering, it could actually be deliver some profits to the utility. I don't know if that's legal, illegal. It's almost like a side business, but I'm just wondering if there's positive ways, in terms of finance, or positive ways in terms of when you're doing tier 3 work, that it actually helps you do more tier 3 work. And so from that side, like growing beneficial load, that it's a net positive to the utility. So I don't know if there's a genuinely symbiotic relationship there or not, but I'm like to learn more, or just sort of kick it around a little bit and see if there are ways to structure it.
Yeah, I think there were kind of a few questions in there. I think the subset of weatherization projects that deliver more savings than the cost, I think is, again, I'm not an expert in this field, but my experience is that that's pretty minuscule. essentially, if there were projects where the savings were going to be net positive over a 10-year period, a lot more customers would be undertaking those on their own with traditional financing alternatives that already exist. So I think that that's a pretty small subset of the projects. I do think there's something to that, that if you're going to be a lender, you have a portfolio of projects, and some might be generating a little bit more revenue, and some may be generating a little bit less. I'm not sure if that's built into the pays model. Essentially, you must guarantee the customer that they're never going to pay more. I don't actually think that that is a component of the pays model. I think that under pays, and of course, Ms. Agard will probably address this later, that the savings are passed directly through to the customer minus administrative costs. I don't think the utility is taking any portion of that. In terms of your piece about electrification, we do see electrification certainly delivers benefits to all customers through those added electric retail sales that generate additional revenue for the utility, and those are passed back on essentially to the ratepayers. You know, VEPSA to date, we're only a few years into Tier 3, but we have tried our best to make Tier 3 revenue neutral to our ratepayers. So in essence, we pay out a heat pump rebate of $600 or $700, and over the life of that heat pump, we're trying to recoup that $600 or $700 through retail sales. So certainly, the more heat pumps we put out there, the more retail sales come in. We don't see that necessarily as, it's not as though the utility is making money off of that investment. They're just recapturing what they paid out upfront. And so to the extent financing supports greater deployment of electrification measures, there is a value to the utility.
And, you know, it's been a while since we've talked to a little bit, so much about Tier 3, and we have 2 new committee members. Can you talk about what the Tier 3 obligation is and how utilities meet that? It'll be a useful refresher for everyone.
Yeah, sorry, and I think I had planned to start off with that, but of course, Tier 3 of the Renewable Energy Standard, in the most basic sense, assigns each utility in the state the obligation to acquire fossil fuel reductions by supporting projects that their customers undertake. So there are a few different pathways. Essentially, when we're evaluating Tier 3 opportunities, that's really the gatekeeper. Will it save fossil fuel as step one? And there are certainly parameters around how much it can cost the utility. There is a cap on how much you can spend to acquire those savings. But anything that saves fossil fuel, so we essentially would divide that into a couple of different buckets. One being when you replace fossil fuel with a measure that uses electricity, so electrification measures, and the primary ones that we think about are cold climate heat pumps, electric vehicles, and heat pump water heaters. Those are kind of the biggest ones where you're replacing your fossil fuel and you're adding electric load. But then, of course, weatherizing a house, you reduce the amount of oil, maybe from 1,000 gallons a year down to 800 gallons a year. That those 200 gallons are also fossil fuel savings. Again, and I don't want to belabor this point, but the difference we see is when the utility, from a financial perspective, when the utility supports a weatherization project, i.e. insulation and air sealing, just to get a reduction in fossil fuel use, that's money out the door that will never be recovered. Whereas when we support a heat pump project, we can recover hopefully all or some of that investment. Again, both are eligible for Tier 3, both have value, societal value, environmental value to the state in supporting our energy and climate goals. But VEPSA's strategy has been to prioritize electrification, which again, I think the committee is fully aware there is kind of a gap in funding and service delivery around traditional weatherization. It is an eligible Tier 3 measure. It's not one that that electric utilities have focused on, I think, for justifiable reasons.
Right. Yeah, it makes sense that you would do something that, especially given that you're not-for-profits, that helps your customers keep the rates down.
And to our members, I just need to say it really is an equity issue, and there's not a right or wrong answer here. But the perspective of the VEPSA members really is we want to be fair to all customers. And if I'm handing out checks to one subset of customers and not the other, there are equity concerns that are highlighted.
Sure, great. Any committee questions for Ms. Bailey? I do have a quick, can you just give us a little update on where storage fits into the universe of measures that utilities are starting to deploy? Are they seen as a tier 3 measure if they're under the control of the utility because you can shape load and deliver a benefit to all ratepayers, or where do they fit these days?
Storage has been deemed, it is specifically, I think, called out in the statute, enabling tier 3, and they have been deemed as an eligible tier 3 measure. VEPSA has not to date deployed storage under tier 3. I know Green Mountain Power has, but essentially for the reasons that you mentioned, Senator, the credit to the utility is essentially for the regional reduction in fossil fuel generation. So by deploying storage, you're able to avoid calling on a generator somewhere in New England, but most likely a fossil fuel generator. So I am not familiar with the intricacies of that calculation, but that's the conceptual, that's the value that storage provides. And then VEPSA has not yet supported residential storage. We are pursuing what's more considered utility scale storage, 500 kW or so. And we've got an RFP on the street right now for deployment of utility scale storage in a handful of locations in our member territories that would be at the control of the utility. I imagine we'll be pursuing tier 3 credit. We just haven't gotten there yet.
Yep. And is that because relative to other tier 3 measures, this is a relatively expensive measure, or, so you're piloting it to learn more? Where are we on the scale of how useful a tool is it to get?
Well, we see utility scale storage is certainly more cost effective than individual storage. Individual storage in people's homes certainly delivers value, but I think the customer has, a lot of that value goes to the customer. The reliability or the, avoiding power outages, a lot of that is customer value that's not monetized from the utility perspective. So most of those, I think those arrangements give the utility some ability to use the battery for peak shaving, but that's only one piece of essentially the value stack that you need to kind of stack up to get to covering the cost of the battery. So as just a peak shaving measure, I don't see those as cost effective from VEPSA's.
And one more tier 3 question. So are the tier 3 calculations done utility by utility because your power mix varies? So, if WEC is 100% renewable, there's more benefit to a cold climate heat pump than if you're at sort of system mix. That's
true? Yes. Yes, that would be true for electrification measures. Any measure where you're taking away fossil fuel and then relying on electricity, you need to take account of the host utility's electric supply. So essentially, the way this is done is through the technical advisory group housed at BEIC at Efficiency Vermont. And essentially, there's just a tool, a template, and each utility would plug in their own power supply portfolio to get those net savings at the end of the day. So there is variation among something put in WEC's territory versus something put in Northfield Electric's territory.
Okay, great. Just wanted to brush up my tier 3, make sure I'm keeping up with the program. All right, any committee questions? I'm just looking around. All right. Well, it will be interesting to hear from Roanoke Electric and Wichita Electric co-ops, later this morning, and hear what their experience is using this kind of. I don't know actually whether it's on-bill financing with sort of I think of it more as something like what Green Mountain Power did, where they led the effort on eHome and managed the money versus to the meter, which is the most novel thing I think that we've heard about so far. It has this feeling when people, I think, I'll speak for myself, when you first hear it, it's almost like, this seems too good to be true. And then, so it's like, okay, let's make sure it really is true. And then let's really see how it works. And so it'll be great to find out. I know it's used in many jurisdictions, but it's still a very small piece of the overall puzzle of the way we finance this work, and it'd be interesting to know why. One advantage I think we have here in Vermont is we have small innovative utilities, so it'd be interesting to see if it makes sense to any of you folks when. And again, for timing, the goal is that by the time we come back in January next year, that the working group will have had a chance to work with you all and others to really vet this. And there may be maybe a new tariff is required in order to implement all that kind of stuff. We'll figure that stuff out. We're also asking the PUC to help us in the bill, and so we'll see if we can find out if it makes sense for Vermont. So, obviously, I'm hoping it does. If it, it's always good to have another tool in your toolkit.
We're similarly, I'll just throw in, we're similarly kind of fascinated with the PAYS model and do think that it has a lot of value. And when you say seems too good to be true, I think from our conversations with folks at PAYS, from the customer perspective, perhaps it really is intended to be too good to be true. And that reflects a lot of the back end work and a lot of the coordination and implementation that has to happen on the back end, which, again, may be valuable to have all of these partners engaged, but that's kind of how they're able to deliver that customer experience. Right.
Well said.
Good point. Yeah, right. From the customer's point of view, that's if it seems so attractive, we may see higher rates of participation as people learn to trust that the program actually does do what it purports to do and build in the guarantees. One interesting thing about the risks, of course, we appreciate, no one, there'll be bad debt always for every program, but I think Paul Silla was telling us that the rate of default on payments was lower for people involved in PAYS programs than people who are just regular customers. So it's like there was increased exposure for the utility with those people, but they were more reliable payers. So, I will want to dig into that one too and see if that holds up, sort of, if that was anecdotal or that's a general pattern that and then the other thing is with some of the programming, are there opportunities to insure against not meeting performance targets? Are there ways to insure against a bad debt? And it may be that there's something that's cost effective that no single utility has to work out for itself. But maybe there's a state role in trying to bring down administrative overhead and the cost of any kind of exposure that each utility that participated would have to bear. So
I appreciate that note. And I think that has been conceptually brought up. One, consistent with what you've heard, that there's very, very low non-payment of these loans, which is very encouraging. I've heard the same thing. And the potential to have a loan loss reserve. It's been kind of delivered as we don't need it because people do actually pay them off. And it would give the utilities, I think it could potentially give the utilities in Vermont a little bit more assurance, right, and security, at least in the early years, to know that those costs would be covered in the event that there was non-payment.
Sure. One of the things that we heard about why you would go to a utilities as opposed to someone like EVT is because utilities have large plants, and so they have an asset base against which they can use to get credit, to get money that they would loan. And I don't know how that sounds to your ears, well, we already have all the debt we want. We're not interested in taking on any more debt to support such a program, or that as long as if it was treated as an investment that you could make your return on, then you could say, okay, well, it's just another piece of equity that we've put in, and we get a quote unquote guaranteed rate of return through rate making. So that's okay. Have you thought about that one?
Again, with the disclaimer that I'm not a financing expert, I do know our members are going to be very reluctant to take on additional debt to fund these. But I will acknowledge utilities do have some access to low, really low interest lending. One program that we're looking at is through USDA, the Rural Energy Savings Program, actually loans money at 0% for 20 years to utilities. So extremely attractive. So it's something that we would be remiss to not look into. And then you can relend that to your customers at something above 0% and below 5%. So recognizing utilities do have access to capital, we do have infrastructure, and I will just say the VEPSA members are averse to taking on a lot of extra debt, so it would be something we'd proceed cautiously on.
Sure. And so is that RESP money, whatever? I know there's a few USDA acronyms floating around. I'm just trying to keep up with them.
Yeah, that's the RESP program, and I've heard it's pretty competitive. And I know they did change their criteria a few years back. To the point that you made about Efficiency Vermont not having assets versus the utilities that have infrastructure. I think previously EVT was an ineligible borrower, and they may be eligible now. They can speak to that, but I do know there were some changes in the program.
Okay,
get more open.
Senator McDonald?
Just, the witnesses brought up excellent questions, and one of the things that I think we heard with the solo testimony was that utilities aren't always the best banks. And what the chair is suggesting to the many smaller munis and perhaps co-ops is that if they find a comfortable way to have someone else do the banking services, that this might be an opportunity to that the smaller ones who are not by their nature good effective banks might choose to participate in if they were convinced that the program protect the interests of those smaller cooperatives and munis. So it seems like the witness is saying that those entities are prepared to listen and make suggestions on how to meet those goals.
That's a fair characterization, yes.
Right. Yeah, I'm trying to remember. You just said something, and anyway. Can you say a little bit too, for the committee's sake, about decoupling? Like how utilities make their money these days, because I think for most people they still have. It's hard to believe that you don't sell electricity and mark it up a little bit, and that's how you make your money. Can you just talk about how utilities make money in general? Like the nutshell version of how you make a profit or how you make your money.
Probably a very nutshell version. I do not see us as decoupled. I don't know about the investor-owned utility structure, but for the municipals, I wouldn't say that we're decoupled. I mean, we do make again, we're at cost service provider, so we cover any cost the utility incurs, including the costs to participate in VEPSA and receive services through VEPSA through the electric sales. My understanding of decoupling is that it breaks that incentive for utilities to essentially recover all of their costs through per kilowatt hour sales. But I don't think that we have been decoupled yet. We're still recovering our costs through the kilowatt hour sales. You need to pay for the infrastructure, you need to pay for the power supply, and you need to pay for the administration of the utility. And that does come through our kilowatt hour sales revenue right now, which is focused so much on making tier 3 revenue neutral to the extent we can. I'm not sure if Patty has anything to add on decoupling, but you may need to have someone else address that.
Ms. Richards?
Just answering the question regarding, how we make money and, marking things up, essentially as the not-for-profit structure, we don't mark things up. It is a for-cost service. We have to, meet our lender ratio requirements and things of that nature, but there is no for-profit. And in the co-op model, every year we collect more than we need to cover expenses in our bank requirements, it gets passed back to the consumer. So from our financial model, there is no profit, there is no markup essentially.
Yeah. Okay. And so maybe I'm glad I asked the question, because I think I'm finding that I want to make sure that I may have had a misunderstanding. So is it only investor-owned utilities for whom the return on capital and including debt is one of the ways in which they, quote unquote, make their money?
Right. I mean, and again, I'm not representing any of the investor-owned utilities here.
Yeah, right. Sure.
But
right.
There's an incentive to make, if they were able to make a return on $1 in a particular program, they have an incentive to go do that. For WEC's model, we are driven by mission incentives versus financial incentives. So everything is done based on what we think is good for the membership and what makes sense financially for the membership overall.
Right.
We don't make a profit on it.
Okay. Well, thank you. I mean, it's a good reminder for me, thinking of the traditional tests like used and useful, and in terms of what's allowed into the rate base. So, okay. Well, great. So with that, if there are no more committee questions, we'll wrap up on. Thank you for visiting with us, and there's some interesting learning coming our way, and I think we'll all be interested to learn about what the opportunities are to find yet another way to help us make more progress. Okay. Seeing no committee questions, then we'll conclude this part, and we're actually switching back. We have a guest. Our next guest is back on yesterday's topic. Mr. Teagarden couldn't participate yesterday, but we wanted to follow up on one more line of opportunity around workforce development, and that was with career technical education and bringing high school students and adult learners into the mix through technical centers. So good morning, Mr. Teagarden.
Good morning.
Thanks for joining us. I don't think we've all met before, so let's just quickly go around the table in alphabetical order. This will be a test for members of the committee. My name is Chris Bray. I live in Bristol, and I represent the Addison Senate District. C comes next.
This is Brian Campion. I represent Bennington County and Wilmington.
Mark McDonald, I represent Orange County.
Good to meet you.
I'm Dick McCormick. I represent the Windsor County Senate District.
I'm Rich Westman, and I represent most of Lamoille County.
Mr. Westman and I, our paths have crossed before.
Yes, there many times.
All right. Well, good morning. So we're looking in, as you know or may know, we're looking at growing our state's weatherization program. Yesterday, we were talking about with quite a few people who are involved in the area of training, apprenticeships, and helping people find a pathway into a career, clean energy economy, or the green collar jobs, whatever we're calling them. And one of the critical pieces we didn't get to really look into too far was, I think this is your area of connection, which is what goes on at the career technical centers. So if you could introduce yourself to the committee, and we'd love to learn more about workforce for this industry from your perspective.
Okay. Well, again, my name is Joe Teagarden. I'm the director at the Center for Technology Ethics for the adult education part of that school. I've been involved with training for the past 20 years, adult education, particularly the last 4 or 5. Something I really would want everyone to be clear about is that if you didn't know, so if you do, I'm not trying to be condescending, but if you don't, there are 16 plus career and technical education centers in Vermont. Their main mission is to educate high school students. But each one of those centers has an adult, we call it continuing adult education part of it. It's a small part of it, but it is a part of it. And that's what my work is right now in adult education. That part of the career and technical education centers are separate from the high school. It's funded separately. It doesn't take place during the daytime. It takes place on weekends, summers, and weekday nights. So sometimes people, when we start talking about career and technical education, they automatically go to the high school piece of it. But I'm here today to be able to talk. I can talk about both, but I'm more interested in talking about the adult part and the different opportunities across the state that adult can have at career and technical education centers.
Great.
So,
Well, thanks for helping create that the big picture.
yeah.
And I think we'd like to focus on your area of expertise, but if you can also share some about the opportunities for high school students to move into the same area of work, and that would be great too. Thanks.
Sure. So I mean, almost everyone knows that at the career and technical education centers, they have a variety of programs, and probably at each career and technical education center in the state, they probably have an automotive program and et cetera, et cetera. But everyone's not exactly the same. And going further, the adult part of it does not necessarily mirror what happens in the day part or the high school part. Again, the adult part is really geared to create custom education for adults in an area based on workforce development needs. Going back to the high school piece, students clearly who graduate from high school, or even sometimes during high school, could attend adult education classes. In fact, at Essex, there are several students who take part in welding classes and things like that, but not a lot. Mostly adults between 25 and 45 are involved with the classes that I organize. And I'd be glad to talk to you about the classes that I organize, because I think that might be interesting for you to know about. But again, I just would like to reinforce is that the areas are very different, and they're funded differently, and they have different issues. But what the adult portion is good at, and I think that might be interesting to you, is that we can customize instruction, training. We're flexible. We can act quickly. We don't go by the same rules and regulations of teachers and who teaches and whether they are involved with being licensed or not. Most of our teachers come from the field, and for example, registered nurses, HVAC, master HVAC technicians, things like that, and they don't have a teaching license. So keep beating on that, because I think it's important for you to know that because given that situation, you can imagine that across the state, 16 centers across the state, you can imagine then 16 very distinct training opportunities or areas to get, say, something like weatherization people trained across the entire state.
Okay. And just so I understand, for the daytime technical education programs, are all the instructors licensed teachers for those, or can
absolutely.
you have?
Absolutely. Yeah, the daytime programs, it's just an extension of the high school. As you know, high schools send kids to the day programs, we'll call them, to the day programs. Sounds kind of odd, but to the technical center to learn skills and to complete their high school education and get a diploma. So yeah, that all those teachers are certified by the state of Vermont, and no question about that. Mhm.
Okay. Well, I mean, part of the reason I ask is sometimes sometimes we ask people to, for lack of accreditation as a teacher per se, some of the people who are most talented in doing something are prevented from instructing.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so I just want to make sure that we're not missing an opportunity to have the practitioners of the very skills that we're interested in from participating and helping grow that workforce. But we can loop back around to that.
Well, I think that's one of the strengths of the adult education piece, and I can give you some examples. I have programs at my school right now that are involved with HVAC, nursing, dental assisting, natural gas certification, um, something called Type S, electrical certification. All those are taught by people in the field who do not have teaching credentials, but they certainly have expertise to do that. For example, in nursing, we have RNs. In the HVAC program, we have master technicians. In the dental assisting program, we sometimes have dentists, but other times we have dental assistants who are teaching those classes. So, and then I guess the other one that you might be interested in too is a natural gas certification, particularly in Chittenden County. That's a big deal. And the person who teaches that class is an employee of Vermont Natural, or excuse me, of Vermont Gas. So not teaching credentialed, but certainly they are teaching what they know about.
Right.
And I think it's
right.
pretty important.
Sure. Absolutely.
Mm-hmm.
And how about weatherization? Is there a evening program that teaches air sealing and insulation, or can you say something about that?
No, there's not at my school, but let me talk to you about my HVAC program, and that will lead right into the weatherization conversation, I think.
Okay.
About 3 years ago, three and a half years ago, I came to the center, and my director, Bob Travers, indicated that the field of HVAC was training was sorely needed in the state of Vermont. And probably if you look around the state, there is almost no one who teaches heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and refrigeration to adults. In fact, I don't know if there's anyone right now that does the whole thing. So we started a program. I started a program called the HVACR Technician Training Program. It's been going for 3 years now. It's taught by technicians from the field. It's 168 hours. There's 4 courses. And so far now we've had, in the spring, we'll have 36 new technicians that have entered the HVAC field in Vermont. And when I started that program, the first thing I did was I went out to the people in the field, the businesses, and asked for their support, and got their support in terms of them sending me students, them helping me with expertise, reviewing curriculum, things like that, making sure that what we were teaching was, exactly what was needed. And also then any help that they might be able to provide in terms of just support in general. And so they came on as my partners, if you will. And so now I have a thriving business, some thriving educational thing going,
Right.
where these businesses now come to me to train students. One thing so how does that lead into weatherization? Right now is I would do a weatherization program. I could create one in a heartbeat if one, I could get students in the seats. So the program would have to be one that was important, led to a career, led to an enhanced wages, that was readily available, or the jobs were readily available when it was over. Because because taking my HVAC program as an example, it costs $3,400 as tuition to take this program. No one is going to get involved with that program. No one, if they don't think there is a job at the end of this. I mean, a really good possibility of a job. Just no one is. And so we can't just create a program with the hopes that they will come. We create an educational opportunity with business people supporting us and sending us people and then hiring them then. So if I was going to do, if you asked me, for example, or any of the other people in the state that are in my position to create a program, the first thing that would come out of their mouths would be is, how are we going to get these people in our seats to train? Yep. And then working with the community or the business community, we could figure out what kind of training needs to be done. And the other problem that might come up then is if there's any equipment that's needed to do this training, then we're going to have to figure out a way to find money for this equipment so we could properly implement it in our lab situations. Because as I said earlier, the money, we do not get money from the high school part of the career and technical education program. It doesn't flow to us. In fact, I don't even think it's legal for it to flow to us. So so when we start programs, we have to come up with ways to fund it.
Sure.
Now,
is your HVAC program pay for itself these days now that you've got it up and running?
Absolutely pays for itself. In fact, it's one of the programs that really keeps my whole program afloat. We have people,
that's good news.
People who come to it. We have waiting lists for people in it. We've expanded pieces and parts off of it, meaning things like the Type S certification, natural gas, things like that are connected to it. I don't know if you all know about refrigerant handling, but in the state of Vermont, you have to be licensed to handle refrigerants. And so those are the kind of things that people come to my class for. So another thing that would be attractive if we had a weatherization program or training opportunity would be if the technicians needed to be certified to do the work, let's say. Right. Somehow you wanted the state of Vermont wanted every weatherization technician out there who was providing service to the community to have some sort of credential saying that they knew how to do X, Y, and Z. If they have to have that certification, then they're going to be coming to the programs across the state for sure. Right. If they don't have to have it, then it's up to their business that they work for to think that it's important and send them. Right. So that's the deal on us being able to provide weatherization programs. And again, if you told me today that there were 20 people waiting that would pay me, I don't know, let's say $1,000 to take a weatherization class, I could probably be up and running in a couple of months. Because I got space, I use the facilities, I got connections in the community, things like that.
Right. Yeah, one of the things we are back, you mentioned credentialing. One of the things we've been hearing about from people who make their living in this is, that they don't refer to it just as weatherization. They talk about building science and particularly moisture control, so that we want to make sure that if we're running a statewide program to help people weatherize, we're not also creating problems for those people 8, 10, 12 years down the road with moisture and rot, et cetera. So having people be well trained seems to go hand in hand with certification, especially if the state is in the end going to be the reason that people are signing up for a program. We would want to run a program that actually saves people the money that we're all aiming for. But let me pause there. Senator McCormick. We can't hear you yet.
Mr. Teagarden, you mentioned earlier that people are not going to be trained unless they have a realistic expectation that there's a job at the end of it. And on the other hand, we're not going to actually have a regime of a lot of weatherization without an adequate number of people being trained. this is the kind of dilemma that shows up for electric vehicles. One of the problems with electric vehicles is there aren't enough charging stations.
Mhm.
And one of the reasons there aren't enough charging stations is there aren't enough electrical vehicles to make them worth putting out. And, and probably one goes back to the early days of the automobile, of gas stations and cars. So what do you recommend how do we approach that chicken and egg dilemma?
Well, I don't know how you approach it. What I know is, here's what I know, is that if you ask me to create a weatherization program at my school, I would be going out to all the small construction companies around Chittenden County or wherever who I thought could provide this service, who would be providing this service. And I would be asking them or I'd be informing them that I was creating a training opportunity that they may not be able to provide, and they may not be because they're busy doing other things. And I would be asking them to send me their employees or recommend people to come to my program to take the class. The people in the business community, and I think in this case, are going to have to be the ones who would drive the issue that you just described. If I'm going to get people to come to my program, then the businesses are going to have to think it's important for them to come. And that would be where I would start in trying to get their attention and to get them to support what is needed. That probably then goes back to the credential thing. If somebody is going to work, I'm just blabbing now because I don't know how you do your work, but if somebody is going to provide a service based on a state contract or on a state law, then I think those people that provide that service ought to be credentialed in some way that matches up with your expectation. And if that certification, let's just say it's something as simple as OSHA 10, if you want everyone to have OSHA 10 who works on a weatherization program, that's kind of silly because it's just a basic certification. But if you want everyone to have one of those, then people are going to be seeking those out. And that's the same way with this particular case. If people had to be certified in some way, based on particular needs of what you want to see done, then they have to be trained somewhere or they have to learn that somewhere. And that's where I'm just saying is the adult tech centers in the state could provide that service for you in a hurry. That's what I'm saying.
My guess is sometime in the 1910s or the 1920s, some people probably went broke opening a gas station, but there were people who were willing to take the gamble. And some people, and eventually, because it sort of ratcheted up. The more gas stations, the more people were willing to drive, and so on. Well, thanks. I mean, I guess we've gone as far with my question as we can go right now. But we're going to have to figure out a way to ratchet it up. This one pushing this a little bit upward.
Right. Well, I appreciate
the other option.
Comment. Yeah.
Okay. The other option, you talk about getting people to come. The other option is to provide some sort of stipend or some sort of monetary amount to the people who provide the training, and go out and then recruit people to be in these things. I mean, Vermont Works for Women, they have several programs that they have grants and they recruit their students to come to the training for free. And that gets them in that way. All I'm just saying, going back to the amount of the training, if training is kind of expensive. And again, somebody might come to the training if it's not too overly costly. So.
Yep. For the HVAC program, you were saying $3,400 total tuition for the 68 hours, right?
Mhm.
For sort of sub courses.
Mhm.
Who's usually paying the 34? The employer saying, "Oh, this is a good investment on my part to make this employee, trained and capable much sooner than if they're just going to do it bit by bit on the job or something."
Over the 3 years, it's been a mix. For example, we have one company called Alliance Mechanical. You may be aware of that company name. They have reserved 2 slots every year because they want to use this class as a professional development opportunity for their employees. So they pay for it. Then there are students who actually do pay for it right out of their pocket, just are able to afford it. And then there are students who take advantage of VSAC grants that pay up to $3,000. And so the program then, with all those things available like that, the program is affordable. It takes place in the evening, 5:30 to 8:30, and therefore people can work during the day and come to class at night. And in the case of the HVAC class, there's so much need for HVAC techs out there that businesses are very happy to hire employees and then let them off work a little bit early to come to class.
Uh-huh.
So
Okay. And if you were asked to start a weatherization program, what would the startup costs be for you in terms of time, energy to go out and solicit businesses, develop that curriculum, find the appropriate certification, buy any kind of equipment? Could you just sort of rough out a budget? If
that's a that's a chunk of stuff to do.
Yes. Well, I don't mean to. I know it could be. I have no idea how much to start a new program. That's all.
Well, I can say to start our HVAC program, we had to have some electrical work done in our lab. It was about $30,000. We had to acquire equipment, which was to date around $40,000. And when you say create a weatherization curriculum, I know nothing about weatherization other than I know that when the wind blows through my window, it's not a good thing in time. So I would have to go out and I'd have to completely understand what needs to be done in terms of weatherization, what it is that each home, what areas someone has to look at, and then what has to be repaired. And then, you develop a curriculum from there as to how that gets trained. If it's looking at an attic and seeing if there's adequate insulation, if it's looking at windows and seeing if they're sealed properly, there's probably more to it. I heard you talk earlier about heat pumps and the different kinds of things that are involved. So that if there's different, checks around a home that have to be done, and there has to be expertise as to how to do that, I'd have to figure that out. So that chunk would take a while. I would just hope that somewhere out there was already existing weatherization curriculum. I mean, I would just like to think that exists somewhere, that I wouldn't be inventing the wheel.
Right. For instance, Vermont Technical College has a program that Efficiency Vermont helps support, and I think you can get your BPI certification, Building Performance Institute. So my impression, I don't know about these things firsthand, but it sounds as though they're a variety of things.
That's a good point, because I know several years ago, VTC, I know I work with Maureen Hebert a lot around, continuing education. And then I thought at one point in time that they had put together a trailer of some sort, of weatherization training trailer that they could move from one site to another. And that always seemed interesting to me, that you could pull some sort of a trailer up in front of a school, and on that trailer with all the equipment that was needed to teach the technical things. So I always imagined a classroom atmosphere with that trailer parked outside. And I was always just waiting for VTC to come to me and say, can we do this at your school? Because right now my phlebotomy class at my school, is done by VTC, and they do exactly that. They supply all this stuff. They come to the school and they supply that work, and I pay them a fee, and I recruit students. And the same thing could happen with weatherization for sure. I'd love to work with VTC on that. That'd be great.
Okay. And can you say a little more about, so what is the relationship between VTC and the tech centers? Do you count on them for like curriculum development because they have some resources you don't, or I'm not sure who it is that develops which curriculum for whom? Sounds like you're both teaching adults.
I've been an advocate for a long time, and I mean a long time, that the VTC and CCV would be more closely connected in terms of with us, with career and technical education centers, particularly the adult part now, more connected with us in terms of supplying certificate level training. I can't compete with CCV or VTC on, college level, engineering and that kind of stuff. That's craziness. But I can work with them to provide certificate level training like phlebotomy, like natural gas, things like that. If we were somehow more closely connected, we then could maybe in fact, if the tech centers were quasi VTC or CCV entities, we then could provide training even faster and probably share materials more. But we're not very closely connected. It's been a common gripe forever. You probably can I figure that out in my presentation. It's been a gripe, and why it doesn't work as well as it should, I never can figure it out. It just seems crazy that we're not more closely connected. But I could talk to you ad nauseum about the meetings I've had with Joyce Judy, Tim Donnelly or whatever, and about how we tried to make this work with Jeb Spalding. And I've been around to all of them, and it's well, enough said.
All right. So a sore point. Right.
My comment would be, I don't see why they don't see you as a feeder for students for them.
I could say is that we could be more closely connected, and
I think I'm agreeing.
Right. Yeah. Well, so sometimes we need to learn more, and Senator Campion is chair of education, so we have another window into all this kind of work and the relationships that do or do not work all that well. And I've heard, I don't know that this is true, but money, I think, is sometimes people competing over, they'll see someone as a competitor that will cost them something as opposed to an ally that could end up creating a positive relationship that's good for both sides. And the way I hear some folks discuss this more locally about CTE is when a high school student is considering whether to go to our CTE, the money that they receive from the state will follow them to the CTE, and the high school is reluctant to lose that money because the money follows the student. It was in a way, in my mind, always the quote unquote student's money. It's where's the best education for them, and that the money should support them wherever they want to go. But if high schools, for instance, perceive referring a student over to a career tech center as a loss of money, then we've creating a disincentive for them to have that student go there.
That's a very real problem for the high school part of the tech center that I talked to you about earlier. The two parts. I'm the adult part, and that's the high school part. That's a very real problem, but it's not a real problem with me and what I do,
right?
Because that money doesn't flow to me in any way, shape, or form anyway. So,
right.
But like money always talks, but speaking for myself, I've always just said that if CCV and VTC did a more robust workforce development, if they offered a more robust workforce development program or opportunity, then there would be no need for people like me to exist at the career in adult education, because they would be providing all of that. You know, why VTC doesn't provide HVAC training, for example, I'll never know. I mean, why not? Or why doesn't CCV provide it? I don't know. Don't know.
Right. Well, again, so this, I'm swimming out of my depth here, but the sense I have, you know, I'm always hearing about how Vermont has very high school graduation rates, but too few people go on for the kind of continuing education that then sets them up for a more secure financial life, you know, and better wages. And it feels to me like there are too many people missing the opportunity to participate in programs such as the one we're talking about. And I don't know how, if I'm perceiving a gap that's not real, or it really is there, and then how do we bridge it?
Well, I believe that the gap is very real, the one about training. I believe that the high school diploma is of zero value unless it's followed up with some sort of education, training, whatever it might be in. And so for the student who graduates from high school and goes off to find work, you know, for me, my experience says, well, good luck. I hope it works for you. But for those who leave and find a way to receive training, whether it be you know, 4-year college, 2-year college, or whether a student leaves high school and comes to my HVAC program, where he or she can start a great career, that's what they need to do.
Can you say a little bit about what kind of wages someone entering into HVAC, you know, like brand new, they come to your program, they get hired on, what are starting wages like, and what's a career in HVAC look like?
I've been involved with a couple of recommendations for hiring, and I've also talked with a couple of the people in the field about that exact question. I asked them because people ask me that question. They go, "Why should I come to your program?" And unless I know I'm going to make some, you know, some money. So I call people up like Vermont Heating and Ventilation. I get in touch with you know, Jack's Heating and Air Conditioning, all the people who do this work, and they would, you know, for the right person initially will pay, you know, $20 to $22 an hour for that job, and with the promise that later on, if they stay with it, then, you know, they'll get a raise more quick, or well, they'll definitely get a raise later on.
Right.
You just might imagine, I mean, in the HVAC business, there's all kinds of people are coming and going, workers in that thing. They'll leave a job for a quarter an hour difference in wages. It's incredible how competitive it is for HVAC technicians. But if they show up every day and they do hard work and they get trained, then they have a good living. And I can give you field technician after field technician who can tell you that.
Right. So the 2022, is that that's an opening wage? If you seem like a good hire, they take you on, you start at 20-ish, and then those who are whatever motivated go get training from someone like you and get a certification, and that helps them make more rapid progress.
My experience was that if a student is in my program, then that would be the starting wage for that person who was involved in my program.
Okay.
I don't know what they hire people, because they hire all kinds of people off the street and they train them themselves. I don't know what they start them at.
Okay.
But I know in my program, they have said, since the person is in it and they're progressing, then we're going to pay that person, you know, to reflect that ambition, I guess.
Okay. Well, that's great to hear. Thank you for that, you know, because we're always trying to talk about work paying a living wage. You know, people want to work and they want to make a living wage. So it's good to hear that. I know that for the quote unquote, clean energy technology jobs, average wage is 27. So, there's a possibility making a decent living doing this kind of work. And because it's changing so fast, there's a fair amount of room for a real career path. You won't just be doing the same thing forever.
Now, I would tell you, I have a program going right now. I'm working with BTC. It's not a weatherization, but it's a solar technician training program. So we're working with Sun Common. Again, it goes back to that business connection. Sun Common and Burlington Tech Center and we are putting together, or have put together, and is nearing its end, a class where students come in, they learn construction skills, they learn the solar technician installation skills, and when they're done, Sun Common has promised to hire them. So that is a business partnership that I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay. That seems to be, could be a model for a weatherization kind of a class. If you had some people who were going to hire people for sure, or more than likely, then you attract people to it. Okay.
Well, I see that Senator McDonald, I said something that made him frown, so I'm going to pause and see if he wants to if he wants to chime in.
I hope I did.
I just think we once again are suggesting we need to hire, we attract students to learn how to weatherize places, and we are promising them employment, but we have no long-term funding. Sun Common is promising to employ the graduates from VTC, but certainly they haven't posted a bond to keep that promise. They are expecting that there will be long-term employment for solar. Nothing in the bill that we are putting forth yet, I want to say guarantees, or even any students that go into weatherization have to take our word for it that sometime in the future, some legislature will authorize the funding for the training that we're encouraging them to take. If we've done that for Betamax, or if we started training for lighter than air aircraft, or for installing direct current in people's homes, those people would have useless training. So I'm getting long-winded. We don't have long. This is great on the short term. It's absent on the long-term funding. So.
Okay. Well, we have a job to do. That's for sure.
I might give you one more comment. I was talking to the Sun Common instructor the other night. We were talking about jobs in general, and he said, people who come to be solar installation technicians, that's not their life's ambition. They're not going to do that, until they're 60 years old. They're going to be moving, in the industry, seeing new things, going new places. Installation changes, or the product itself changes. He showed me some solar shingles on the house as compared to these big apparati that's on their houses now. So I would never promise anyone, even with HVAC, I would never promise that you're going to be an HVAC forever, because you might, or as a technician, you might go work in a supply shop. You might go do all kinds of, you might manage a shop or something. It's like any other occupation. Just because you get into, for me anyway, just because you get into it, I don't think you ought to be thinking you're going to be there for 40 years. You're going to be kind of following your own path and doing what you think is interesting, and making some more money, doing different things, getting some more training along the way. So
it's that starter job, and you're going to go back to school, and why the VTC and CCV don't see that as future adult students.
All of which is true, Mr. Chair, but we're not We're talking about not funding the starter job.
Right, I'm picking up on it. It's a theme. Senator McCormick, last word to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just wanted to point out that about 50 years ago, I decided to make my living as a folk singer. There's a certain amount of gambling in any career choice.
Mhm.
And sometimes you lose, sometimes you win, sometimes you get out with your original stake intact, and then you do something else. I think that's that's what the big boys do.
Okay.
Well, I started out as a school teacher, and I left to be trained in computer programming. So I worked for a programming company called Electronic Data Systems for 5 years in the 80s. And I was on my way to a computer career. And then all of a sudden, since I had a license, someone said, well, why don't you be a principal of a school? Somebody just got fired, and we'll take just about anybody because we need somebody right this second. And I was young, and my wife and family said, yeah, why not? We'll give that a shot. That sounds interesting. And so here you go. I'm off into another direction, entirely another direction. And that's what's going to happen to these people who get involved with any of this stuff, in my opinions. I mean, let's face it, the construction industry is too hard to work till you're 65 or 70, roofing buildings. There are people who do it, but man, that's hard work.
Yeah.
So you got to change your pathway sometime or another.
Come down to earth sometime. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, I spent most of a summer roofing, and by the end of, and I was only like 22 or 3. I said, my body is not gonna survive doing this, even with young knees. My knees were sore and sore as the summer went on.
You carry a stack of shingles up a 15-foot ladder all day long. You'll stop. You'll think twice about how long you're going to be doing that. That's hard work.
Right. And then there's someone who also always wants to show you that they can carry two bundles.
Right. And that's why you have workers' compensation insurance.
Right. All right. Well, great. Well, Mr. Teagarden, thanks so much for joining us. It's been refreshing to get a straight talk on what's going on this piece. It seems like there's a good opportunity there. We got to put things together.
I'd love to talk to you about the VTC CCV thing again sometime if you like. I'd love to have a longer conversation about that. But
okay. Well, great. All right. So thank you very much. So committee, we have we're having a good conversation, which I'm always loath to interrupt. So we went a little long. Let's just take a 5-minute break, please. I know that's not very long before we'll